In the interest of focusing on ERM rather than on CV, I have I will present my background as a tweet. 40 plus years of public service, government, private, nonprofit, international, recovering lawyer, now does risky business, retiring soon.
Very good.
Hashtag. Consulting soon, no.
So, Nicole Frisch, I have nothing so clever as that. So I have 12 years with 3 different IGs working performance audits. And then the past 4 years, I've been on the operations side with the Department of Veterans Affairs. So that's my background for this topic from an IG perspective. And then since I've come over to the operations side, I've stood up a new office to strategically change the direction of our program to reduce improper payments. And then this year, I was asked to also lead a new secretary initiative that we've branded Seek to Prevent Fraud, Waste, and Abuse, Stop FWA. So as part of that, we're doing the fraud risk management for the department.
So I'm Bob Westbrooks. I'm the Inspector General at the Pension Benefit Guarantee Corporation. I've been there for a little bit over 2 years. I grew up in the IG community. I'm one of the few that can say I started out as a GS7 and worked up. Spent most of my career as an 1811 or criminal investigator, but I was always drawn to the audit side of the house, and particularly influenced by the IIA and the internal audit community in the private sector. I think it's fascinating work that they do, and there are a lot of parallels. So I steal a lot of concepts from there. After I was appointed IG, I was given a gift, which was an unimplemented mandate, which I discovered that PBGC, Congress had mandated that they create a chief risk officer about 3 years before I got there, which is a great gift if you're an incoming IG to have this kind of drop in your lap. And the one thing that was very clear to me was a recommendation to say you need to implement a statutory requirement is not particularly helpful to the corporation. So it caused me almost from day one to kind of dig into what would a chief risk officer look like at PBGC, and how can I help as an IG maintaining my independence? How can I help them advance that role?
Great. So as I said, panelists with diverse backgrounds, experiences. I think we'd start with Larry, who has been in both the IG community and now with an agency. One of the challenges that's always faced between agencies and IGs is coordination, given the various differing responsibilities, and thought we could start with your perspective on some of the challenges you've seen in this space in terms of coordination between agency and IG offices.
Terrific, thanks. So now this is when I'll start to make up some of the brevity from earlier. I spent a good long while as an executive in 2 of the 3 largest inspectors general, and in my most recent IG gig did strategy, analytics, and performance management. So when I was asked to come over to the Department of Housing and Urban Development, I had a good background in it, and also did not go over there with a deep fear and loathing of the Inspector General. I, in fact, think IG people really want to do the right thing, mean well, and properly engage, can be terrifically important partners, although we'd never use that term because it's for reasons that will become obvious later. I would say that cracking the nut on independence is probably one of the most difficult challenges. We begin all of our conversations with our Inspector General talking about how closely we have to work together without compromising independence. Independence is hugely important, not just for the credibility of the IG, but for the credibility of the enterprise. And so as we work on independence, we're constantly looking for opportunities to maintain managerial prerogative at the same time preserving that very, very important characteristic. We, at the agency level, really need the IGs to be independent. That's a very important starting place. It's interesting, the ERM discipline really came to the government fully fledged from the private sector. There is a huge amount of discipline. There's a lot of consulting talent. There are IT platforms that can be plugged and played. It's really pretty extraordinary. The private sector has also taught us that the future is about interdependence. And if there's a vanishing point for us in our relationship with our entire oversight community, it's probably thinking about how we can constructively engage one another. So at HUD, we say we don't cooperate, we don't collaborate, but we coordinate. And those are the neutral terms. Shortly, our secretary is going to issue a statement of protocols that I'll talk about a little bit later that is a roadmap for how we can more constructively work with our Inspector General. I have to say, from being on the inside of the IG world, there's a concept that I think about, and this is my own opinion, called the tyranny of the semi-annual report. Every 6 months, the IG issues a report to Congress. It's very interesting to read if you haven't. It tells you a lot about your organization. But that semi-annual report is filled with statistics that are about the performance of the Inspector General as well as the performance of the agency enterprise. And the funds put to better use numbers and so forth take on a life of their own. And so often in the IG world, and I say this with appreciation, the drive to achieve numbers sometimes works against projecting your enterprise into the future. We do a lot of compliance auditing that frankly is like an anchor, keeps us back, and that is an important vanishing point for us as we go forward. I think Congress over-relies on compliance auditing, and if you look at our audit portfolio at HUD, we have 2,500 unresolved audit findings at this moment. Many of them are compliance issues that frankly don't matter, and they matter in the Washington context, but in a sort of a reality-based world where you're actually making decisions about resource allocations that matter to the health of the enterprise. They're really a blunt force instrument that's used by Congress to drive behavior by the agencies. They're really not useful from a performance standpoint. And then lastly, and this is something we've worked hard at HUD, when I was in the IG world, I always thought, I think it's a truth that every fraud event is a failure of internal controls, and every internal control weakness is an invitation to fraud. And I wondered why the 1811s and the 511s just never could talk to each other, and that there was a huge opportunity for those two sides of the IG practice to work more collaboratively together. So when we stood up the ERM program at HUD, we said we're going to have FRM and ERM in the same thing. And so they're inexorably entwined, and we interact with our colleagues in the IG world, and I hope someday with GAO and OMB as well in that space. So, right, just for starters.
Let me ask you, Bob, since you're coming from the IG standpoint now. Larry wants to talk for both, but I'll let you talk for the IG community.
Not fair.
Yeah, and I will say, so I can't speak for the IG community. I'll speak for my office, and this has been the challenge in the last 2 years or so, working with the folks with the OMB community and public policy, trying to figure out how to implement A123. It's, well, can't we have a standardized approach and some common approaches to what's acceptable behavior from an IG and what's out of bounds? And I still don't know the answer to it, quite frankly. So all I can give is just kind of my perspective. And I love when Larry and I did a panel last month, and I love listening to him talk, because it underscores for me the point that what works in HUD and is working in HUD won't necessarily work at VA, or won't necessarily work at Pension Benefit Guarantee Corporation. We all have a unique fingerprint, right? We all have, ridges and grooves and some commonality in our ERM program, but how it gets implemented and how you work with an IG, I don't know how to escape the fact that it's a personal relationship between senior leadership and the agency and senior OIG leadership. So I find that fascinating, this piece, and they can, it works for them to have ground rules. For us, I shy away from kind of established, explicit ground rules, because I want to maintain my independence. I want maximum flexibility in the future, so I don't want to get locked into any sort of agreement or memorandum of understanding of what I can and cannot do. I want to preserve the right to be able to do really anything that I need to do in the future, and I just can't predict where ERM is going to go. So I shy away from that part of it.
Could you maybe just also spend a minute, since you've been doing a fair amount of work for the IG community and interacting with OMB, other executive branch agencies, and just what we're trying to do as a community generally, in this space and how we're interacting with.
So we've had, it's been an interesting couple of years. We've had a number of events as a community thinking through, and it's really not what is the appropriate role of an IG, is what are some appropriate roles of an IG, and really to find the third rail that we can all agree on are things that we shouldn't be involved in, and it's, in our language, government speak, it's program operating responsibilities. I don't want to own risks. I don't want to own the management of risks. But I've got, and my staff has, unique insights into risk identification. And it would be negligent for us if we have this information and we don't share it with Larry or Nicole. We're sitting on this information and we're like, okay, well, really, the best goal is to wait, a year till we get an audit report out on it. That's not really the best result for us. The best result is to feed the information as soon as possible, yet be able to distance ourselves from the process so that we can come back and independently audit that. So as a community, we've been having a series of events to talk and talk in small groups about, okay, what's working in your agency and what's working in your agency, and what are things that we can sort of agree on that we shouldn't be doing. And I think I wish there was more specificity to it, but it really comes down to no program operating responsibilities, don't own risk, don't manage risk, but try to figure out a way to inform risks. And in our world, we've got a very clear statute. And we all know, everybody knows that's in government knows one of our statutory requirements is audits and investigations. But we also have a statutory requirement to provide leadership to promote economy efficiency and effectiveness and program integrity. And that's the piece that we kind of latch on to, and figuring out how we can leverage that statutory requirement to add value.
If I could clone Bob, I would. He's a great visionary in this space. At HUD right now, we're responding, we're all hands on deck with hurricane response, as you can imagine. And as part of this sort of rethinking our relationship, the IG has weighed in and has worked very, very hard to provide all of the information in audits and investigations and so forth related to Katrina and Sandy, so that we don't make the same mistake. So it's, without violating their independence, what they're doing is just providing a huge amount of value add for us right now, which is terrific. But apropos Bob's observations, I think.
And I think one of the important things when you're thinking about ERM and fraud risk management is that a risk is something that hasn't been realized yet. And for that, that's where I think that you really have an opportunity to coordinate with your IG to talk about where they think you might want to look somewhere, because everybody has these restrictions on their budget right now, and no one can possibly touch every area that they want. But with the fact that risks haven't been realized yet, that's really an opportunity for coordination and sharing of information.
A couple questions have come in. Do you envision changes in ERMFRM guidance with the new administration's focus on reducing policies and regulations? How has that to date caused you to rethink or consider differently any of these issues that we've been talking about? Any thoughts on that?
For us, it wouldn't, because again, we've got a statutory requirement independent from A123, and we are, you can look at PBGC as an insurance company, and a lot of agencies that have similar missions. We all have kind of that credit risk management function that's out there, and I think every agency there is has that IT risk management function. So I don't think that and everybody's got improper payment risk management function. So regardless of whether there's regulations or not, we're going to have to do that work.
And to our shock and amazement, it was easier to bring the IG to the table than it was, it was almost as easy to bring the lawyers to the table as it was to bring the IG. We have a pretty robust legislative risk element in our risk profile, and our new acting general counsel is very interested in taking a more business-like view, and so as we're working on the President's reform agenda, legislative risk has become a real topic for us. So we're actually working it through the risk process now.
Another question that was asked is about A123 and makes the point that A123 test controls already in place, whereas ERM is more about designing controls for the risks that are emerging. Can you elaborate or discuss how agencies can incorporate ERM in A123 testing and how you look at A123 and what is the intersection between them?
So I know for VA, one of the things that we're doing this fall is partnering with the Department of Treasury FIT office to do an assessment of the fraud, waste, and abuse risk in all of our programs. And what we also want to do is build an automated risk assessment capability that would meet all the requirements of A123. So you could take an individual program and assess its risk for fraud, waste, and abuse, for improper payments. And then I kind of envision it like chunking them together like Legos, and then out pop your enterprise risk. So that's one of the things that we're trying to do to get it more integrated so that you're fixing things as a whole rather than in silos. And that's where we're really trying to take the management of our improper payments and losses.
Great. Going to go back to you, Nicole, because you've also been in both the IG community and now in the agency. And VA has obviously been in the news a fair amount the last few years. And we're curious if you have what you've seen in your agency in terms of working with, I won't use the word partnering, but working with and coordinating with your IG office. You've got a new IG, a lot of changes in both the agency and the IG office. How's that played out in VA in this space?
It's really important with us to coordinate and make sure that we're communicating effectively and not talking past each other. Certainly in improper payments, which has been under my purview for the last 3 years, VA has seen a significant growth in the improper payments reported. But the majority of those improper payments are actually not lost. They're improper because of the way the definition is. So we've had a lot of discussions with OIG and OMB and even the Hill on what does our improper payment number mean. And with the change in the administration, we've been able to work more closely with OMB on what that impact is. When you report 5.5 billion in improper payments, it's not a good report. But when you really look at our improper payments, the majority of them, between 87 and 90% of them, actually went to the right person for the right amount. But we have an issue with contracts being in place timely for care in the community, and it's very important that we provide care to our veterans on time. So,
another question that was asked is, can you describe any of the tangible benefits you've seen so far from ERM programs at your agencies, or that you, Bob, have seen through the IG community, through the work you've done, with OMB or others? Are there things out there that's happening now in the executive branch in the larger agencies where we're seeing some positive results from the ERM process?
I can, from the PBGC standpoint, which is again a very small organization, what I've observed is a more thoughtful approach. It all comes down to where you're spending your time and your money, right? Because budget decisions have to be made. You got to prioritize your risks. You can't fix everything in year one. And to me, the fascinating place to kind of cut your teeth in enterprise risk management is in IT security, because it's all risk-based, right? And there's a lot of quantifiable metrics that you can use. So it's very logical if you dig your teeth into it, sink your teeth into it. So that's an area where I've seen, because of a systemic or enterprise-wide view on it, the corporations made decisions on budgeting to say we're going to. There's certain IT risks that are present that we brought to their attention, and they say, we need to make that a priority. But they can only make it a priority in the context of all these other risks. Something's not going to get done because they're doing this. And ERM's enabled them to have that conversation with our board of directors is, here's why we need to fund this.
You know, just picking up on that point, particularly from your agencies, both HUD and VA obviously have a lot of risk indicators and fraud indicators and improper payments. Improper payments are going up, not down, for the last several years across the government. How do you, in light of the problems that already exist, whether it's with figuring out Section 8 housing or the medical issues that VA's faced, where does enterprise risk management fit into that while you're dealing with these multi-billion-dollar major challenges? How does the agency, how do you all manage the already existing issues that are of magnitudes that many people here may not have an appreciation for, and yet you're thinking about other risks that maybe haven't quite materialized in the same way?
I'll take a whack.
Sure, I'll go first. So I think that is one of the challenges that VA has, because our biggest problems are realized, they're known, they're out there. So we're busy trying to solve them. So in the context of ERM, getting leadership to step away from the known and spend time thinking about what could be realized next, it's a struggle, and we're still learning. But to be fair, we're still learning on how to do that.
So when we designed the risk program at HUD, we said we don't want a risk monolith. We've already got strategic planning, we've already got performance management, we've already got a budget process, we've already do capital planning. We don't need another layer. This is not going to be enterprise list management. We don't want this to be another one of those exercises. What we want is to ask two important questions all the time, and that is, are we doing the right work, and are we doing the work right? Thanks to Peter Drucker on that one. But it really does make sense. So if you look at our strategic plan, there's no risk section in it. It's all informed by risk, but risk is largely invisible in our strategic plan. If you look at our performance planning, same. If you look at our budget planning, even though in the 2019 budget they say is going to be largely risk-based, you won't see a risk section other than me asking for more contractor resources to continue to expand and mature our program. And where it really starts to show up is in capital investment planning around IT planning. Human capital planning is huge. We're in the infrastructure business at HUD, so physical infrastructure is a big conversation for us. So I would say we're succeeding because you'd be hard-pressed to come and find a risk thing going on at HUD. That in fact it's supporting all of the other business activities that need to be made smarter, more relevant, higher impact.
So at the corporation, we've got this looming $80 billion deficit. And PBGC is not backed by full faith and credit, and it's going to run out of money projected by 2026. And these are our grandparents and our parents who rely upon, pay their bills, rely upon these pensions, right? And so when I first came to PBGC, the insolvency risk was really the only thing that was talked about. It was the risk. And it is a huge risk, the insolvency risk, but it's a very a complex risk that's going to take legislative intervention. And so what ERM did was to take that risk, but then also put it in context with all these operational and IT and financial risks. They don't go away, and the risk, and this is what kind of reinforced to the board and to management, was the problem strategically, it seems to me, is that if you don't clean up your house and you have these lingering IT operational and financial risks, you're never going to get Congress to engage on the strategic risks, because they're going to be plucking at you down bottom with these lower risks to say, yeah, we'll deal with your issue when you clean up your house first. And so to me, it was like, this is just good business. We have to have a meaningful dialogue on this, on the insolvency risk, but let's package these other risks as well and deal with it systemically. And that's what they've been doing.
You mentioned Congress and the interactions with Congress. Obviously, as IGs, we have dual reporting responsibilities to the agency and Congress. Does that play in at all to how you've been proceeding and you see the IG community proceeding in this area of enterprise risk management?
You know, I'm cautious of it, and I'm very mindful of it, because I while it hasn't happened, we're trying to operate in a space, like I said, where we're engaging on emerging risks. And sometimes that's dealing with less than complete information, and it's all about timeliness of forwarding the information. And what I fear is that the Hill in particular would want information from us that we just can't give, or second guess our decisions, or really put us in that program operating responsibility role. So that's really, I think the challenge for us is to meet the needs of our congressional stakeholders. We have to do that. And at the same time, help. This is going to take a long time, I think, to educate. And I think we need to educate everybody that we don't have to shine a light on everything all the time. There's some things that, you need shade to grow, and you can't grow a seedling by stretching it, or, have a flower bloom by prying open the petals. Sometimes you just need to organically let it grow and give it some space and give it some oxygen. And I think that's the fear, is that you could get folks from the Hill that maybe don't appreciate the value of ERM, the long-term value of it, and try to get us to stretch things when it might be premature.
Right. Different area question came in. What challenges have you encountered with ERMFRM when using a federal shared service provider? Several people have raised the question of federal shared service provider.
So HUD has some dubious notoriety as being the biggest shared service biggest shared service lift and shift in federal history. We moved most of our S&E accounting, personnel, travel, and so forth over to the ARC at the Treasury recently. It was painful. It's still going on. It takes years to really overcome the dislocation that goes on. But what has emerged is, now that we have the SLAs that you put in place drive behavior that's very positive around data. So we have more timely data, more accurate, better husband, and better governed than we've ever had, which has allowed us to start to do some pilot work right now around predictive analytics, because now source documents and accounting data are in the same platforms, and we can access them equally, and we can see, all right, well, this was originated under these terms, and here's where the expenditures were, and begin cross-correlate them. It's an auditor's dream to be able to do this. The shared service provision, painful though it was, allowed us to do something really breakthrough and really move in a constructive way into continuous assurance and into the areas that I think are really going to rewrite the way that government operates. And we're pretty excited about it.
So I think it would be premature for VA. We're currently moving towards a shared service provider, and we have nothing but positive, hopeful thoughts about the change that's coming to VA. We have a rather old financial management system, which does make it very difficult to tie things together, draw that thread across programs. So we're hopeful that the shared service provider movement that we're doing is going to help us.
So Larry, you mentioned...
I'll buy you a drink. Come see me.
You mentioned data analytics and how to use that, and this is a good place, perhaps pick this question up in terms of the IG community is looking at these issues, agencies are looking at these issues. For enterprise risk management, it's obviously an important tool to have, the ability to manage large data sets and think about them and look at what it tells you. Where does that leave us with coordinating with IGs?
So this may be a bridge too far, but I think, based in my experience, and I mean no insult by this, frequently if an audit or an investigative activity goes bad, in my experience it has been around argument about the facts. And you can easily lose a lot of momentum on any oversight activity based on just a continuous argument about what the reality is. It's my hope that at HUD, and stay tuned on this, that we can work with our Inspector General to begin to co-own some of these analytic resources and some of the data. There's good and sufficient reason for our investigative teams to have their own sandboxes to play in and their own cloistered environments. But much of what we're doing as good managers on the program side, auditors care about as well. And so it's my hope that we'll be able to really begin to use the shared service platform that we have now to create a much more robust and much more practical conversation with our colleagues in the oversight community. Stay tuned on that, but I think there's a lot of potential in it. There's a lot of potential.
So I think with data analytics, the thing that gets a little lost is that in traditional auditing, when you pull your statistical sample, you have a finite number that you look at and you go and you validate. And sometimes I find that in discussions about data analytics, it kind of gets lost that there's still that need for validation and that you can't draw conclusions from just the data. So I think that's the important thing and something that I continually bring up as we develop our Seek to Prevent Fraud, Waste, and Abuse program is that data analytics is going to be a big piece of that, but we need to make sure that we're cognizant of the possibility of false positives and how we can drive and better improve our data analytics. And the sharing of those business rules, to me, is very important. If I have two programs within VA that are both building data analytics, I want them to share their business rules rather than compete with each other so that we're all kind of learning. And the removal of false positives just does everybody a favor.
So this is an area we talked about this once before, and I wish I could articulate a little more clearly, but it does make me squeamish to partner with management on data analytics and have a common platform. And there are lots of reasons for that. I mean, we came up at a very micro level. I mean, just recently with our penetration vulnerability testing at PBGC, we're working on the rules of engagement, and as somebody suggested, well, maybe there's a way that we can kind of do this jointly, shoulder to shoulder, looking at the same screens, and I'm just not there yet, and I just don't know in the IG community how many folks are there yet. We need there's certainly efficiencies, but I just wonder whether the independence and which gives us our objectivity, I wonder whether that trumps the efficiencies that would be gained by doing it. I think it's something to think about, but it would be something that we would go very cautiously on a shared platform.
One of the things certainly as we've moved forward with data analytics and at DOJ OIG is to realize how much of a challenge it is because the department itself doesn't have strong data or usable data for that purpose. Just curious how, from your standpoint, your two agencies, how far along are the agencies and the components in having your data analytics capability to be a sufficient, strong process in a wide space, as opposed to sort of finding only those places right now where there is that kind of data? Because I've found that that's one of the biggest problems in government. When you start talking data analytics, it all sounds good until you start asking what kind of data is there really sitting there that's usable data.
Yeah, I think that is a struggle for VA because of the age of our financial management system. So one of the things that we've done as part of the Stop FWA program is to try to figure out what each of our 85 programs are doing. And what we found is that some are not doing anything yet and they're looking to us for guidance. But we have some areas where they have spent time in data analytics, in medical care claims is really, I would say, where we've moved forward. And as part of the partnership with Treasury that I mentioned, we're hoping to get some business rules from CMS that they've been successful with, because again, business rules is really the most important thing to root out your false positives and make sure that you are moving data analytics forward. So we certainly are going to be looking at where do we take data analytics next, but the first thing we want to do is do a risk assessment in each of our programs, because it doesn't make sense to spend $100,000 on a $10,000 problem. So that's where
you are now
focusing.
Yeah, this is a huge issue. We have somewhere around 60 different grant programs at HUD. 24 or so different standalone grant tracking tools. I mean, to manage HUD, all of our grant initiatives as a portfolio is almost impossible. But we learned a hard lesson on the administrative management side with our shared service migration, that your superpower is the aligned to provider paradigm. You don't have to negotiate what your common data structure is going to look like if you're migrating to an outside platform. It's uncomfortable. You have to spend a lot of time saying, look, good enough is going to have to do for the moment, because the virtue of having a common analytic framework is so important for the organization. It has been so successful at HUD, despite the grumpiness on the shop floor because of the new systems and so forth, that we're now actively pursuing a shared service opportunity for grants management. And we know it will take time. It's a 3 to 5 year lift at least, but we've done our gap analysis and we see that there are tools in the marketplace right now that will do almost everything we need. Many of them come with baked-in analytics, and so there's huge opportunity in the GOTS community to do this work. But I'd like to leave you with this notion that if you can overcome your natural resistance to aligning your data future to someone else's data framework, the fact that everyone is aligning to that creates a terrific forward momentum and an impetus for the kind of high-quality analytics that I think we all crave doing. We know we're smarter than we're allowed by our current infrastructure to be. Yeah. And continuous assurance is not going to go away. This is very robust in the private sector. It's an implementation play for us in the public sector. I'll be in my grave before HUD would ever be able to negotiate a common standard on data there.
Right. And this is a question that's come in, which is whether your agencies, or frankly any agencies you're aware of on the federal level, are using analytics at this point in the ERM process, or is that still on the wish list for many agencies to get there because of the problems and the challenges we just talked about?
Yeah, we didn't use analytics for our ERM process this year. We're still infancy stage.
Yeah.
When I was at Postal Inspector General, we risk ranked our entire 2014 audit portfolio and did heat maps of which each of the operating units within the audit shop, correlated those on bubble charts with level of effort and so forth. And it was a very revelatory experience, I think, for the audit team to, by their own admission, see that 2/3 of the work they were doing was medium to trivial value in terms of the health of the Postal Service. It takes a commitment not only to telling the truth, but to accepting the consequences of telling the truth. And that's not something to take lightly.
Different area, another question. OIGs are uniquely positioned to accumulate knowledge of fraud within an agency or department based on our work. How can the agency management encourage the sharing of this information by the IG without compromising IG independence?
It hasn't been a problem. I've been at Department of Transportation, a fairly large size office, at Postal Service, SBA, and PBGC, and we share risk intelligence all the time. And I've managed hotlines before where that's sort of on the cutting edge of emerging risk, right? Where you see perhaps an operational risk kind of popping before your eyes, and you share that with management. It all comes back to, we don't have independence for the sake of independence. Independence is for the sake, you need to be independent in fact and appearance so that you can be objective. And that's the thing. So if your work product is questioned and somebody says that it's, or it won't have value if it's not objective. And if somebody questions its objectivity, its value is diminished, right? But the independence itself is kind of like, we focus a lot on that, but the underlying is what we need to focus on. And there's nothing that I've done in sharing emerging risks information that would later question my objectivity. There's one point and that I will make that it's related, and I don't know if we'll get to a question on it, but it's important to know, like, I see two distinct roles for IGs. So you have one, you've got the role in communicating emerging risks. And we've got risk intelligence, and that's not going to really do much in and of itself. You're not owning the risk, you're not assessing the risk generally, you're like a pass-through. The other role is auditing or oversight of the ERM program as a whole, and that's where it gets tricky, right? It's the balance between the two to say, okay, I'm sharing all this information, or I'm engaged in meetings on how you structure your program. Is my audit team now going to be objective when they go in and they audit that program? And that's what we focus on, is maintaining that objectivity and independence there. The ability to go in 2 years when it's mature enough to actually, there's enough activity in the PBGC ERM program for us to go in and do a meaningful audit and give meaningful insights and suggestions for improvement. We want to be able to be in a position to be able to do that.
So if I may, Bob, could you talk a bit about how you're prepping the ERM team for the upcoming audit? We talked about that at the partnership the other day. It was real interesting, sort of helping them understand what's going to be on the quiz, what your expectations are.
So one of the things that was an easy presentation for me as the corporation was trying to stand up the program was I did a presentation on audit proofing your ERM program, and it was attended by a number of people there, but you usually don't get, you would see something like this perhaps in the private sector, but usually you don't get a lot of IGs themselves doing a how to audit proof your program, because your auditors, as you can imagine, would be howling saying, don't give them the answers to the test, or we don't know how we're going to scope this job in the future. But the beautiful thing with ERM is that it's not this mysterious beast that came out of nowhere. I mean, it's been, like Larry said, it's been in the private sector forever. And I had a slide, I don't know if I showed it at that presentation, but I showed it a lot. And it's a slide of across the world when other governments implemented ERM and when the United States did. And it's actually embarrassing. We're actually behind Canada and Australia. Which is, we like to be on the leading edge of stuff, and Canada's had ERM for 10 years, 15 years, the UK's had it, so there's a body of knowledge out there. So in developing an audit program, it's easy to say these are the things, and from my perspective, what I tried to key management into is a very valuable lesson that I learned from actually implementing ERM in my office. And I only have 25 people, but we have all the functions you would have at a large organization. So for me, it was like I need to take the medicine here to see where the challenges are in implementing. And the one thing that hit me very quickly is it's a very subjective and imprecise process. Is this risk a 3.4 or 3.6? I don't know, and I don't really care, to be honest with you. It's a number, but it's just a number. And unless you got qualitative data to back that up, it's just a number. And it's a number based upon people's subjective determinations. So for me, the thing to focus on was the controls and the monitoring that is in place. I'm like, okay, I'm telling you right now, PBGC, in 2 years, I'm going to be back, and we're going to be auditing what your mitigation plans were for the risks that you identified. I can't find things that they don't know about. Maybe in the future I'll get better at that, but I'm like, okay, well, you identified these risks, you rated them relatively high. What's your mitigation plan, and what were your monitoring activities to monitor your mitigation strategies, and what's the loop back? How did you correct your behavior? And it seems to me it's, this is an easy one too, right out of A123, it kind of pops at you, is ERM is the link between your strategic planning and your performance. So there's got to be that link there. That's the bond between the three. And it's like, here's the answers to the test. 2 years, this is what we're going to be looking at. And I think it had some impact.
Yeah, when we talk about, the question talked about sharing information that we learn as IGs on fraud risks or risks more broadly, I agree with what Bob said about the importance of us sharing the information. We're not the ones who are going to solve the problems. Management's going to solve the problems, and if we see something, we need to let them know about it. I'm curious, though, in flipping the question the other way, which is one of the things that has struck me, I've been IG now for 5.5 years, how rarely management engages with me and asks me to look at an issue that they've identified. And so I'll flip the question and ask the two of you, what do you think about the agency going to the IG and saying, hey, we've identified these risks or these fraud areas. We'd like you to get your auditors, if you can get into your work plan. Obviously, the agency can't tell the IG what to do, but certainly you can ask or go to them. How much do you think about doing that, and should there be more of that kind of communication from the agency to the IG?
So I know in the areas that I work in through the CFO structure, there's multiple touch points with annual audits from the IG. Specifically, I'm thinking of both our IPURA audit as well as our financial statement audit. And I know that my leadership especially, I respect them so much because they really do try to coordinate with the IG and share the problems. Because honestly, it's not helpful to the agency if the IG doesn't get the findings right. So we do share our problems and talk about them and kind of talk about how do you resolve it. I'm not saying that we always get the recommendations exactly that we want, but it is helpful to ensure that the audit continues to have the right findings and helps us to focus not just on compliance, but on where we get our biggest bang for our buck budget-wise. Especially I'm thinking especially in the area of improper payments. With so many of our payments, they're not a loss. So we can spend millions correcting the fact that the contracting officer didn't sign the contract until 2 weeks after we started making payments. But we don't save any money doing that. So the more we're honest about where our problems of loss are and help get findings in those areas, the more helpful it is, I think, and to the taxpayer as well.
So this is really a big issue and a really important one, and it's typically the place where things start to break down in your relationship. We are focused like a laser on how we work together, but not what we work on. So that it's that very mindful care about not stepping over the independence line to compromise either of our position. But there are how things that we can work on that we are, like what is the structure of our risk profile data, so that when we have conversations with the IG about strategy, we can put working documents together that actually line up. How many boxes do you have in your heat map? Is it a 3x3 or a 5x5? Well, if you're both using the same dimensions and you're using the same descriptions, then you can have a meaningful conversation. And that plays out pretty well. Getting more closely to the question, it's my personal experience that having a little bit of rigor in the annual audit planning cycle is a good thing. And so we're exploring ways that the agency can actually participate in an appropriate way in some of those deliberations around the development of and the risk ranking of the audit planning cycle as we go forward. Where push really comes to shove is the whole concept of self-disclosure. If I, as a management official, come to the IG and say, we've got something you'd like to work on, oh my, the consequences can end up going in a lot of different directions. I had a personal experience recently testing this new spirit of comedy with our IG, where I actually signed a self-disclosure letter as the Chief Risk Officer for the department, and within 2 working days I was being deposed under oath by 2 special agents. Now, if I was a GS-14, I'd have been utterly freaked out by that experience, but I had been an IG executive, I knew what was going on, it was the friendliest of all possible interview room conversations. May you never be in that setting. But old habits die hard. And, we had an opportunity for reflection about what it means then to actually self-disclose, bring a problem to the IG. And as we're working, we're looking for the right vehicles to surface these issues, because I truly believe the IG world has an extraordinary capability to add even more value than they already do. And it's that nut that we need to crack.
This will probably earn me an IG demerit, but I'm going to publicly call out somebody at PBGC who's here, who's the head of the corporate controls group, Marty Baum, who actually does this. And Marty and I have a very close relationship, very independent, and he's a deep thinker, and he's been around the corporation for a long time, and he regularly communicates risks to our office. And we're a small office, and we're not a grant-making agency, so some of the one of the risks that he identified for us recently is going to result in $1 million funds put to better use for us because of the work we did, and it's that level of communication. So I think it can happen, and I think there's got to be trust on both sides, right? And trust that we'll act upon information, and an understanding that we'll act upon information if warranted, and also understanding that we can't act on all information either. So.
Another question, is it true that IGs can identify an issue but not advise on a solution? What if the IG has the right approach and the program office doesn't have the right approach? Go with the IG model, right?
So we do something a little bit unique to our office. We do risk advisories, so it's one of our product lines. So we've got, yellow book audits and blue book evaluations and inspections and investigations. And we do risk advisories for things where they're emerging risk. We want to get written documentation on, fulfill our responsibilities to Congress. And my view on that is that I don't like identifying problems unless I have possible solutions. So we report these not as recommendations, but non-binding suggestions. And they're broader than recommendations, but they're really designed to stimulate thought. When we started doing there was some pushback from the auditors saying, no, we need to keep the recommendation process pristine and locked in. And the irony of ironies, when I look at my numbers, I've gotten better response on the suggestions much quicker, like by a year or so. I've gotten the corrective action on responses because management has been appreciative of not directing or being prescriptive on the solution, but to say, here's some boundaries for you, but you need to think about these kind of suggestions. So that's been our approach.
Yeah, I think it's one of the biggest challenges as IGs is how to identify an issue, prepare, draft a recommendation to management, but to make sure you're not prescribing the answer for management. And talk about that a fair amount. For all of our experience and expertise among our auditors, our evaluators, our inspectors, the fact of the matter is that we're not running the program, we're not managing the program, we don't have the experience of running or managing the program, and we are, for that reason, quite clearly, not management. And so you've got to be very careful on how to do that and draft those recommendations for that reason.
So I was just going to follow up. So a real-life example, down in the weeds that I'm dealing with is on a web application at the corporation, and I'm dealing with, and in the IT world, it's entirely appropriate for management to accept certain risks, right? If they document it, they're allowed to. Management discretion. We may not agree with it, but they can accept risks. And so there were a series of risks that were accepted, and now it's really where it gets messy with ERM, because it's like, okay, well, because they've accepted risk as an IG, does that mean we step back and not? Do we have a role in second guessing their acceptance of the risk? And what I'm coming to the conclusion is there are instances where it's appropriate, using the right language and the right way to challenge things, there are ways that we should be challenging the acceptance of risks if they're not done knowingly and intelligently and voluntarily. There's certain risks that we should question, and then there's other things we should defer to management on.
Another question, have you seen examples within the IG community where ERM is the focus and has taken the place of the actual annual auditing planning? My experience is no. We're not even close to that far along where we'd even have the chance to even think about that as an option. Whether it's even appropriate to do is a secondary question. I know, Bob, you haven't seen it.
Yeah, so here's another real-life application on this of how we view our independence is I've got an audit plan. I've got different constituents than management does. We've got a lot in common, but we also have different stakeholders as well. So we did our separate risk assessment, and just because ERM is new at PBGC, I briefed senior leadership thoroughly, but I told them, I said, look, I don't want to be I'm not going to give you this document because I don't want to be that guy who's the first out there to give you the document. Maybe 5 years down the road, IGs will be sharing their risk assessments, but we're not there yet. We have our independent responsibilities that we have.
I think there may be work that we can do, this isn't a fully formed thought, around root cause analysis, that it's sufficiently neutral It can be derived from pre-existing work products that could be aggregated and thematically analyzed and so forth. But there may be an opportunity for the IG to inform not direct, but inform deliberation on the management side around strategic planning as we begin to really put particularly around capital expenditure in the IT side. There's a huge amount of expertise in the IG side that could be very, very usefully applied for us, and I think in a neutral way, although it's always fraught. But
well, I think every IG aspires to that place where, on the audit side, that management comes to you and say, "Can you help us with this problem?" And that's the desired state, but not for all of your work, but certainly for the more thorny problems.
Is there a role for the I&E part of the IG community to lean a little more across that independence line, to be more of a consulting partner than?
I don't know that the independence line is pretty firm, but I do think what the evaluation and inspection programs give you is a more flexibility in scoping your job. It gives you the ability to have much shorter timeline. Unfortunately, a lot of offices kind of stretch out, so their I&E work looks just like Yellow Book audit, so you don't really save a whole lot of time. But if you want to get in and look at a problem quick, I think evaluations are a great tool, and I think GAO is a great model for that, quite frankly.
Shifting with the next question, how has the uniform guidance impacted A123? No one looks like they want to bite at that one.
Next question.
Next question. Do you find the use of contractor personnel to actually benefit the concept of independence and objectivity? How does contractors play into this? We've got a couple of questions about contractors, and I'm not sure necessarily what it means to get at the benefit of independence and objectivity, but there are a couple of questions on how they play into ERM thinking, and the discussion we've been having, because so many agencies are moving more and more, I know at DOJ this is true, to contracting and contractors.
So one of the things that we're doing at VA in having a contractor through this partnership with Treasury do an independent assessment of all of our programs is to take out the inherent subjectivity in risk assessments, be they the risk assessments for ERM or the risk assessments required to determine if you're at significant or at high risk of significant improper payments. There's that subjectivity where then they all funnel in at VA to the CFO's office, and people say to me, well, how do you know that's right? And I'm like, well, I'm not sure. So one of the things that we're going to do is have the contractor come in and kind of help us with that first brush where all programs will be assessed, and then we'll build an automated tool that'll build on that. And then so if there's some significant change in the risk assessment between when it's done independently and the next year when the program utilizes that tool, it should be a discussion on what the difference is. But I think contractors really help with that. They dig in, they learn the program from the program owners, but they still have that ability to assess it.
I think it's a real important differentiator in program success, actually. We have gone deep on contract partnership. Our fulfillment partner is KPMG. They've got a really terrific set of corporate capabilities in this space. There are other vendors out there that are good too. This isn't a plug, but the flexibility it gives me and the independence that it gives me is terrific. I can bring in a SME for 2 days with a very specific set of deep technical skills, deal with the issue and move on, and with a spirit of independence from the program hierarchy that you wouldn't get otherwise. These are conversations of consequence about stuff that matters, that there's usually no clean answer to, that involve trading in resources and so forth. There are lots of landmines when you're using career staff, and to have the clear-headed thinking of an independent external set of eyes is just a superpower as you're going forward. Plus, these folks have been building their practices for years on the private sector side, and OMB, God love them, didn't really federalize this implementation. This looks just like risk management in the private sector. So you can plug a consultant in, generally speaking, very, very quickly and easily, and really maintain momentum in your program in a way that you couldn't. If you were doing this in-house, oh my goodness, I don't know how I'd have retired by now, quite seriously.
So I'd be remiss if I didn't mention, PBGC, one of the 3 top management challenges is over-reliance on professional contract staff. So, for us, I do worry about independence a little bit with contractors, because the reality is you pay people to do things, and if they want to continue doing business, there's opportunity for them to see your side of things, and whether from supporting an ERM program or even on the program operating side, the challenge I see with contract staff is I say competency, but I don't mean it in a negative way. It's really on risk identification and risk assessment. Are they in the same position that a career staff would have? I don't know, but it's something we think about in our top management challenges, that reliance on staff. So.
I'd say for the record that we have a very strong bright line between the operation of our program and any decision making that's qualitative or quantitative that results in federal decisions. I'm very mindful of the fact that this is a federal program. It's got to be run by feds. The contractor support is there to provide some of that horsepower, but that's their role, and I think that's a real important point.
So we've got a few more questions here, but unfortunately we are virtually out of time. I'll just, in the last minute, we just throw the floor open to the 3 of you if you want a takeaway concept, where this is going in the future, or the biggest challenges you see yourselves today going forward in this space. I don't know if any of you want to sort of touch on that for 30 seconds.
So I know for VA, we see it as an opportunity. Constantly, we try to stay positive about learning about our faults and recognizing that we have places to grow. And I think all of the challenges that we have really give us opportunities to improve, and that's how we're looking at it, as an opportunity to improve and get better and become more efficient.
Any thoughts from the IG community, Bob?
Yeah, I'm a big believer in risk management in general, and this enterprise risk management concept, consolidating your risks, weighing them, and considering the context across the organization. I understand and believe that it's going to take a number of years for the federal government to mature to a place where it should be. And so, I pledge to be patient, a little patient with the corporation, but I am going to nudge them too, because that's my job, is to push them along.
So I believe that organizations don't collaborate. Individual human beings who trust each other collaborate. And if I had one wish, it would be that my secretary and our new IG, whenever he or she comes on board, explore the salutary benefits of malt beverage together, and use that as a way to really develop a sense of personal rapport and respect and a common business sensibility about the enterprise. And this is not a technical exercise. It's about good business, good government, service to the citizen. These scoring numbers are just a stepping off point for conversations of consequence. And if we take it that way and really build trust in from the beginning, I think we can accomplish huge things.
It's a good last word. So join me in thanking Larry, Nicole, and Bob for a great discussion.
Thank you.